I was obsessed with Guitar Hero as a kid. There was a period where I can say with full confidence that it took over my life. These games are so integral to who I am now that I'm genuinely curious to see where I'd be if they never entered my life. I think I was too young to fully appreciate music by the time I'd first played Guitar Hero 2 all the way back in 2006, nearly 20 years ago. I was raised in a very musical family and nowadays gig very frequently. I've been a very passionate musician for so long now that I've forgotten a time where it wasn't a part of my life. And I think in a lot of ways, perhaps more than I even want to admit, I owe a lot of that to a studio called Harmonix. Not only did their games instill a sense of rhythm in me at a very young age, but they also showed me a lot of formative music that remains influential to me even today. I really felt an urge to make this video because recently, the scope of how impactful these games have been on my life has really been hitting me. I mean, I have Guitar Hero and Rock Band to thank for teaching me how to play drums, which is something I couldn't be more grateful for. Specifically though, there was one game that came out while I was still in elementary school that combined two things I loved very dearly at the time: Rock Band and the Beatles. I had always been a Beatles fan. I mean, my first name is Jude, so needless to say, I was raised on the stuff. I had this game on day one as a late birthday present, and I spent all day playing it. Something you'll notice if you're a fan of these games is that this isn't just a coat of paint on top of an already existing game. Some of the band-specific Guitar Heroes and Rock Bands tended to be very similar to other already released titles in the series, and it's easy to see why. Take an established and polished engine, add a few new models and features, and call it a day. And these vary. For example, Guitar Hero Metallica is a bit more of a proper love letter to the music of Metallica than Guitar Hero Aerosmith. And none of these games are inherently bad. It's just that the Beatles Rock Band is definitively the best band-specific rhythm game that ever got released from a presentation standpoint. Everything was handled with care here. The story mode goes through the Beatles' entire career, from the days of playing in small clubs in Liverpool, to Shea Stadium, to the psychedelic studio era, and beyond. Even including things like the studio chatter between the band and George Martin, and specific days when you select each song that were known to be tracking days. There's a lot of huge highlights in their career here. You've got the Ed Sullivan Show performance, the aforementioned Shea Stadium, and the famous final performance of the group on the rooftop of Abbey Road Studios. Something incredible that they did for the band's late, and in my opinion best period, was include these amazing visualizations for each song, with many of them tying into the themes of the songs themselves, like an underwater theme for Octopus's Garden, a fully modeled Yellow Submarine visualization, and some really trippy ones like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and I Am the Walrus. One thing I noticed was that in While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the visualization takes place on this grassy hill, but the weather is overcast and stormy to fit in with the song's solemn vibe. And then in Here Comes the Sun, it's obviously very sunny and warm. It's really cool seeing as they're both George tracks. This kind of stuff is well above and beyond what is expected from these types of games, and just makes this game even more replayable and enjoyable. They even took the time to recreate some iconic early promo videos for tracks in this game, like Hello Goodbye and Revolution. This game even added 3-part harmonies to the vocals, because of course that's a necessity when it comes to the Beatles' music. Along with the excellent in-game presentation, this game is chock full of insanely well-animated cutscenes that remain faithful to the band's aesthetic while also being incredibly unique. Each aspect of this game's presentation is just top-notch. They even went as far as to release specific Beatles-themed peripherals that were so cool looking. I actually had the Rickenbacker as a kid, and it was so fun to strum along to my favorite early-era Beatles tunes playing it. Okay, so that's enough gushing about the presentation for now, but I can't promise I won't come back to it later. Let's talk setlist. So obviously when you're covering a band with a discography as extensive and diverse as the Beatles, you're going to omit some classics, and you're going to throw in some questionable tunes. Now by questionable, I don't mean bad. But I will say the game's setlist may have been slightly affected by trying to show each era equally. I couldn't tell you why we're missing Strawberry Fields Forever and we have Boys instead. Probably to include more Ringo tunes, but even then I'd probably rather have Don't Pass Me By or something. But that criticism aside, this track list is fantastic. Of course, as a Beatles superfan, there aren't a lot of tracks by the group that I don't enjoy, but in terms of capturing every era here, they've done a great job. There's a nice mix of classics and deep cuts. Like, yeah, there's Get Back and Here Comes the Sun, but we've also got stuff like And Your Bird Can Sing and I Me Mine, one of my favorite underrated George tracks. I also can't mention the track list without bringing up the fantastic DLC. They did Rubber Soul, Abbey Road, and Sgt. Pepper's full albums with the same attention to detail as the rest of the game. Unfortunately, this stuff isn't accessible anymore through legal means, but I recommend you seek it out anyway. It's too cool to ignore. So let me speak on something obvious, and something that could potentially bother hardcore fans of the Guitar Hero and Rock Band series. These songs are, relative to other rhythm games, pretty damn easy. The game isn't a pushover or anything, and I'm not saying they're not complex as musical pieces, but the Beatles are a pop band first and foremost, and they're not Dragon Force. Yes, I totally understand testing your abilities with the guitar controller and playing the hardest charts you can feasibly do, and that's something I personally do very frequently with Clone Hero. But there's a place for a more laid-back experience, especially given that these games were seen as party games and always did well with a more casual audience. I think that's why this game hasn't received as much attention in retrospect compared to Guitar Hero as a whole. This game is absolutely made for Beatles fans. For me personally, it's not about the challenge, but more about the experience. Playing this story mode has always been so damn fun to me as a Beatles fan. I see so much love and care put into each little aspect of it. It's basically like re-listening to many of my favorite songs, but with a comfortable and fun interactive aspect to it. As a kid, I played the hell out of those Rock Band drums to this game. And while Ringo is not the most complex drummer in the world, there are some great grooves and fills here that I think really helped me get my chops up. And it works so well as a party game because whether or not you like the band, you've undoubtedly heard their music. One thing I really appreciate about this game is how many separate models there are for each individual Beatle. Everyone who knows about the Beatles' career knows that just about every year they look like completely different people. And I'm so glad it's not just one model awkwardly sitting out of place throughout each era of their legacy. This is the kind of thing I appreciate. Yeah, Guitar Hero Metallica has young and old James Hetfield, but the Beatles Rock Band has like 5 or more completely different models of each Beatle. I really don't think there's a single game in either of these series that matches this attention to detail. One interesting thing about this game is getting to hear different versions of songs. What I mean by this is that they were given the master recordings of songs to help splice the instrument tracks for use in the game. So for example, almost every song with a fade out normally will opt to actually end, usually abruptly. It's interesting to hear this stuff because it's something you only get a glimpse into with this game really, especially at the time. I'd show some examples, but I'd really rather not get claimed. But there's plenty of footage of full songs on YouTube. Even Her Majesty plays the final chord of the song, which is kind of strange to hear actually. Anyway, the audio from the game uses the 2009 remasters, which is totally cool with me. The songs sound pretty immaculate here, and I'm a fan of those remasters. One thing I want to touch on about the game's presentation and art style is the choice to not make the character models as realistic as they possibly could. This is something that I think Harmonix has always gotten right with their games. This could just be me, but I do think the art style in Guitar Hero games after 3 is a bit ugly. And I think it's because there's this weird blend of realism and odd character proportions and faces. For the Beatles Rock Band, they made an excellent choice keeping the graphics cartoony while still nailing the faces of the iconic 4 Beatles. There's a lot more I could say about this game, but honestly, I don't feel like I need to go much further. If you're a Beatles fan and you haven't played this game, I highly recommend tracking down a copy or emulating it. It's really hard to find certain peripherals, but thankfully the Clone Hero community has found new solutions, like a cable that lets you connect Wii guitars to PC, so I would recommend keeping an eye out for that if you can find a deal. Unfortunately, eBay prices for some of those peripherals has gotten out of hand, and it's not like they're making any more of them. But I would still implore you to seek them out if any of what I just said sounds interesting to you. I think the Beatles Rock Band is amazing as a Beatles fan, and even if you listen to the Beatles casually or just want a fun party game, it can still be very worth your time. They put too much effort into this game for it to be forgotten like this. I feel like I haven't seen many people talking about it like they used to, and I think that's a shame. Don't forget to check this one out if you missed it, or dust off your old copy if it's been a while. Thanks for watching.